Before we dive into our story, drop a comment telling us where you are from and what time you are watching or listening right now. You never know, while you are listening to this story, you might be going through the exact same thing. That heavy feeling of being inside a family, but feeling like you are the furthest one from their hearts. In an old, run-down house on the outskirts of Chicago. That was where Chloe Vance grew up. She was the second child of Daniel and Martha Vance. They weren't exactly dirt poor, but they definitely weren't rich. They owned a small, struggling deli at the local market. They rented a spot and managed to save a few dollars whenever the sales were good. But even with this simple life, Martha viewed herself entirely differently. She loved pretending they were high society. She always wore knockoff jewelry. Her hair was always perfectly styled, even if she was just stepping out to borrow sugar from a neighbor. And whenever relatives came to visit, she forced the image of a wealthy, perfect family down their throats. Taylor, fix your hair. Carter, put on that new polo shirt. Avery, stand right here next to Mom. Martha would boss them around, holding up her smartphone for a family picture. Meanwhile, Chloe stood back in the kitchen, holding a spatula, sweat dripping down her forehead, because she was the one cooking the pot roast, the mashed potatoes, and the pasta for Daniel's birthday dinner. She was only 20 years old back then, but the way she moved, it was as if she had been the mother of the house for decades. She was the first to wake up. She was the last to go to sleep. She was the one reminding them about the unpaid bills. She was the one packing lunches for her siblings. And she was also the one absorbing the brunt of her parents' anger whenever there were problems at the deli. "Mom, can I be in the picture?" she asked softly, wiping her hands on an old, faded dish towel. Martha briefly glanced over her shoulder. Her eyes quickly scanned Chloe's clothes. A faded blouse, old jeans, and worn-out sneakers. "Oh, just wait a minute. You can join later. You look like you just crawled out of a grease trap. It might ruin the aesthetic of the post," Martha replied coldly. Chloe just forced a smile, but she felt a sharp sting in her chest. It wasn't anything new to her. During every holiday or occasion, she was the one preparing everything, but she was never in the photographs. She was the one doing her siblings' laundry, but she was the one getting yelled at if a shirt wasn't ironed perfectly. She was the one skipping meals to save a few extra dollars for the house. But she was the one called a freeloader whenever she wanted to buy a single thing for herself. Their eldest, Taylor, was always the mother's favorite. Pretty, fair-skinned, obsessed with makeup, and a smooth talker in front of crowds. Even though she was lazy around the house, she was always the main character in Martha's stories. Our Taylor really has that international vibe. She knows how to mingle with high society. Martha would constantly brag. Carter, on the other hand, was the only boy. Because of this, even if he failed his classes, even if he was caught lying multiple times, and even if he stole money from the deli register, Daniel rarely scolded him. To their father, Carter was a boy, so it was supposedly natural for him to be reckless while he was young. "Just let it go, Chloe. He's your brother. He's just being a guy. They do stupid things," Daniel would always say whenever Chloe tried to report him. The youngest, Avery, was always defended no matter what she broke. Chloe would take the blame. If Avery made a mess in the living room, Chloe had to clean it up. If Avery cried because she didn't get the toy she wanted, Martha would order Chloe to give up her own savings, just to make the youngest stop whining. In the middle of them all, Chloe was the daughter who felt like a stranger. She wasn't rebellious. She didn't complain. And she certainly wasn't lazy. The truth is, she was the smartest among the siblings. She was a scholar in college, taking up a business administration degree at a small, private campus. She dreamed that one day, she would open her own cafe and training center for young people who needed to work while studying. But her family didn't know that. Or if they did, they simply didn't care. "You? Run a business?" Taylor laughed one afternoon while painting her fingernails on the couch. "You'd make a great assistant, honestly. Like, someone who files paperwork. But an owner? That's a stretch." Just let her dream. Carter added, lying lazily across the sofa. Dreaming is free, anyway. Chloe didn't answer. She was used to it. Instead, she just picked up their dirty glasses from the table and washed them. As the water ran from the faucet, she quietly whispered to herself, "One day, they won't look at me like a maid anymore." But before that day could come, she had to survive their daily belittling. Every morning before her classes, Chloe would drop by the market to help Daniel at the deli. She carried the heavy boxes of frozen meats. She listed down the orders. And sometimes, she was the one negotiating with the suppliers. Daniel, who used to be a long-haul truck driver, but had to stop due to a bad back, was sometimes kind to her when it was just the two of them. But the moment Martha arrived, her father changed. He became quiet, submissive, and terrified to contradict his wife. "Dad, Mr. Miller is short on his payment. It's missing $5. Chloe gently reminded him one morning. Daniel nodded. "Good catch, sweetheart. You're really good with the numbers." But before Chloe could fully smile, Martha walked in and overheard them. Good with numbers, but terrible at taking care of herself. Martha cut in. "Look at you, Chloe. You're a sweaty mess again. How are you ever going to find a good life looking like that?" "Mom, I'm just helping out at the shop," she answered softly. "Then just help out and keep your mouth shut. Stop acting like you're so exhausted. You eat plenty of our food anyway." Chloe looked down at her shoes. A few vendors from the neighboring stalls heard this. Among them was Mrs. Nora, an older woman who owned a cozy little diner near the market. She had been observing Chloe for a long time. She always saw the young woman's hard work, and she always heard the painful words thrown at her by her own family. Later that afternoon, as Chloe was walking home from school, Mrs. Nora called out to her. "Sweetheart, wait a minute." Chloe approached, holding her old backpack that had a strap barely hanging on by a thread. "Yes, Mrs. Nora? Would you like to work part-time here at my diner? The pay isn't huge, but you get free meals, and if you have homework, you can use the table in the back." Chloe was stunned. "Really?" "Yes. I see how hard you work. It's a shame if your whole life is just taking orders at home." That was the beginning of Chloe's little sanctuary at Mrs. Nora's diner. It was the first time she felt that someone valued her, even without her begging for it. When she was tired, the older woman would make her sit down. When she was hungry, she was given a hot bowl of soup. When she was sad, Mrs. Nora didn't force her to talk. She would just quietly place a cup of coffee in front of her and say, "You don't always have to be so brave, kiddo." It was also at the diner where she met Jake, a delivery driver who often stopped by to rest. He had a younger sibling who also wanted to go to college, but struggled with the paperwork. Chloe helped Jake write a scholarship essay, and from then on, he treated her like a little sister. "Chloe, if anyone ever bullies you, just tell me," Jake joked one time. "I'm not much of a fighter, but I can drive away really fast." Chloe laughed. It was rare for her to laugh genuinely, which made Mrs. Nora smile from behind the counter. She had another pillar of support, Mrs. Bennett, her former high school teacher. Even though Chloe had already graduated, she still checked up on her. "You know, Chloe," Mrs. Bennett said one afternoon when they bumped into each other, "a person who is used to being belittled by others sometimes forgets how high they can actually reach. Don't let them do that to you." Chloe nodded. But deep inside, a part of her was still terrified to believe it. How could she rise up when every single day she was being pulled down by the very family who should have been her biggest cheerleaders? Months passed. Chloe became even busier. Mornings at the market, afternoons at college, evenings at the diner, and late nights doing house chores. When everyone else was asleep, she would take on freelance online editing jobs, using her ancient laptop. Sometimes, she stayed awake until 2 in the morning, just to earn a few extra dollars. Her family assumed she just magically had money whenever they wanted to borrow from her. They didn't know that every single dollar she held was traded for sleep, hunger, and absolute exhaustion. One night, while she was folding laundry in the living room, she heard Martha and Daniel talking in their bedroom. the door was left slightly open. "We need to expedite the visa appointments for Taylor and Carter," Martha whispered loudly. "Avery is all set, our papers are with Cousin Charlie." "What about Chloe?" Daniel asked, his voice barely a whisper. Chloe froze. She slowly stopped folding the shirt in her hands. "What do you mean? What about Chloe?" Martha snapped back. "We can't bring her. We don't have the budget. Besides, who's going to watch the house? Who's going to manage the deli while we set up our new life in Europe?" "She's our daughter too," Daniel replied weakly. "Daniel, stop being so dramatic. She doesn't fit in over there. Taylor has the look. Carter is a man, he needs opportunities. Avery is still a kid. Chloe, she's used to being left behind anyway." It felt like a cold, invisible hand wrapped tightly around Chloe's throat. She couldn't move. Suddenly, everything made sense. The suitcases they had secretly bought, the documents hidden in the bottom drawers, the new winter boots Avery had been wearing around the house. Carter had been watching travel vlogs about Europe on repeat. "It's going to be so cold there," Avery had said while lying in bed a few days ago. "Taylor, do you think it'll snow?" "Of course," Taylor replied. "Just keep your mouth shut around Chloe, or she'll start throwing a pity party." Chloe had heard that from the hallway. She didn't enter the room. She had quietly walked back to the kitchen, chopping onions while her tears fell. She didn't even know if she was crying because of the onions, or because her heart was slowly shattering into pieces. Eventually, their cousin Charlie came over. A guy who always wore polo shirts and too much cologne, even though his eyes looked incredibly shady. He was the one supposedly fixing their immigration papers. "Martha, make sure there are no loose ends. If we add one more name, the costs will double," Charlie said, sipping juice in the living room. "No, it's just the 5 of us," Martha answered firmly. Charlie glanced at Chloe, who was quietly placing a plate of snacks on the table. "Ah, so this one's not coming." Martha let out a forced laugh. "She's guarding the house." Charlie smirked. "Makes sense. There are people made for Europe. And there are people made for the house." The entire living room went silent. But no one defended Chloe. Daniel avoided her gaze. Taylor pretended to be busy on her phone. Carter just grinned. Avery acted like she didn't hear a thing. Right there and then, the last tiny spark of hope inside Chloe's chest completely died. That night, she went to Mrs. Nora's diner. It was already closed, but the older woman let her in the moment she saw her face. "Sweetheart, what happened?" Chloe sat at the very back booth. She was silent for a few seconds before she finally whispered. "They're leaving. All of them. And they're not taking me." Mrs. Nora didn't speak right away. She walked over and gently placed a hand on Chloe's shoulder. "Are you sure?" Chloe nodded. "I heard them. And earlier today, they practically said it to my face. Like I was nothing." That was when she broke down. It wasn't a loud, screaming cry. It was the cry of someone who had been holding it in for years. The kind of cry that seemed afraid to take up too much space, even while falling apart. "Why is it like this, Mrs. Nora?" she asked. "I did everything. I studied hard. I helped at home. I never talked back. I never asked for much. Why am I always the easiest one to leave behind?" Mrs. Nora closed her eyes. "Sometimes, kiddo, there are parents who just don't know how to love equally. But that doesn't mean you are lacking. It means they are." At that exact moment, the little bell on the diner door chimed. A man walked in, clearing his throat. He was wearing a simple dark jacket, holding a folder, looking exhausted from a long day of work. His name was Liam Miller. He had been a regular customer at the diner for a few weeks. He was always quiet. He sat in the corner, drank dark roast coffee, and read documents filled with airport diagrams and operations notes. To everyone else, he was just a serious corporate employee. Chloe didn't know that this man actually owned a massive private aviation terminal and a logistics company. She also didn't know that Liam had been noticing her for a long time. Not just because she was beautiful, but because of the way she always went out of her way to help people, even when she was clearly struggling herself. Liam stopped in his tracks when he saw Chloe crying. "Oh, my apologies. I didn't realize you were closed." Chloe quickly wiped her tears. "It's fine. I was just leaving. But before she could stand up, several papers fell out of her backpack. Receipts of her family's utility bills, her work schedule, and a small notebook where she had written her dream cafe business plan. Liam bent down to pick them up and accidentally read the first line on the open page. One day, I will build a place for people who have nowhere else to go. He looked up at Chloe. There was deep sadness in her eyes, but there was also a fierce bravery that refused to burn out. Here, he said softly, handing the notebook back to her. Thank you, she replied. Neither of them knew that night that this simple exchange would be the start of a relationship that would change Chloe's life forever. She didn't know that in the coming months, Liam would be the first person to truly see her. Not as a maid, not as the forgotten daughter, but as a woman who deserved to be chosen. For now, Chloe went back to her house with a heavy heart. She found everyone fast asleep. In the living room, suitcases were lined up. On top of one of them rested Taylor's passport pouch. They weren't even trying to hide it properly anymore, probably because they were confident that even if Chloe found out, she wouldn't be able to do anything about it. She walked into the kitchen. She washed the dishes. She turned off the lights. She peeked at her siblings, sleeping soundly. Her parents, quiet in their room, and the house that she had spent her whole life taking care of. For the very first time, she didn't pray that they would take her with them. Instead, she prayed for the day to come, when being left behind wouldn't hurt anymore. She lay down on her tiny bed behind the storage room, right next to boxes of old junk. Staring up at the ceiling, she slowly felt a strange sense of peace. Yes, it hurt, but underneath the pain, there was a tiny voice telling her that maybe them leaving her behind was the beginning of her freedom. And outside the house, under the dark sky, the wind blew quietly, like a signal that the old Chloe, the one who always waited to be chosen, was finally going to learn how to choose herself. Before we continue with our story, leave a comment telling us where you are from and what time you are watching right now. Because sometimes, in stories like this, someone might see their own reflection in the main character. That person who has been quiet for so long, but deep inside, is absolutely exhausted from being hurt. The next morning, Chloe Vance woke up earlier than usual. Not because of her alarm clock, but because of the loud rolling wheels of suitcases dragging across the living room floor. It was still pitch black outside, barely 4 in the morning, but the entire house was wide awake. There was the sound of zippers, the rustling of plastic bags, cabinets slamming shut, and Martha's voice, trying to whisper but clearly panicking. Taylor, where is the passport pouch? Stop putting it in random places. It's in my bag, Mom. I told you 1,000,000 times. Carter, get up. We're going to miss check-in. Mom, 5 more minutes, Carter groaned from his room. Avery, put your heavy jacket on. It's going to be freezing on the plane. Chloe slowly sat up from her tiny bed in the storage room. Even though she had barely slept, every single thing happening outside her door was crystal clear. Just last night, her heart had accepted that they were leaving, but it turned out to be a completely different kind of pain. When you actually hear the preparations happening right outside your door, it wasn't a suspicion anymore. It wasn't whispers behind closed doors. This was the day they were abandoning her. She folded her blanket perfectly, just like she always did. Even in her heaviest moments, she never forgot to keep things in order. She stepped out of the small room and saw the living room flooded with luggage. 3 massive navy blue suitcases, 1 red carry-on for Avery, and a designer duffel bag with a fancy luggage tag for Taylor. On the dining table, there was a plate of eggs and toast with hot coffee, prepared for those who were leaving. For her, there was absolutely nothing. Martha was standing in the middle of the room, wearing a thick beige winter coat, even though it made absolutely no sense in the current weather. Her face was glowing with excitement, but the second she saw Chloe, her eyes hardened. "Oh, you're awake," Martha said, sounding like she just got caught doing something illegal. "Yes," Chloe answered, softly but completely calm. "Are you leaving?" Martha didn't answer right away. She cleared her throat and looked over at Daniel, who was busy counting a stack of cash near the table. Daniel merely glanced at Chloe for a split second, before quickly looking away. It was obvious he had been dreading this exact moment for days. "We just have some business to take care of," Martha finally replied. "At the airport?" Chloe asked. The living room went dead silent. Taylor, who was walking down the stairs staring at her phone, froze. Carter, half asleep with messy hair, wiped the smirk off his face. Avery, hugging her travel pillow, looked like she didn't know if she was allowed to speak. "You already know, so why are you even asking?" Taylor said coldly. Chloe didn't respond. She just looked at their faces, one by one. Her sister Taylor, who never once treated her like an ally. Her brother Carter, who didn't care who he stole from as long as he got his way. Her sister Avery, who grew up used to having everyone cater to her. Her mother Martha, who was always ready to humiliate her. And her father Daniel, the man who was occasionally kind to her in secret, but never brave enough to defend her in public. "Why didn't you tell me?" Chloe asked. She wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming. But the edge of her voice was trembling. "What else is there to say?" Carter interrupted, putting on his baseball cap. "It's not like you're coming with us." "Carter," Daniel scolded. But it was weak. It sounded like he didn't really want to argue. Carter let out a short laugh. "What? It's the truth." Martha walked up to Chloe, clutching her handbag. "Chloe, don't cause a scene. It's too early. The neighbors might hear us." "Is it a scene to ask why I'm the only one left behind?" Chloe asked. Martha rolled her eyes. "This isn't a vacation. Things are going to be difficult where we're going. Life overseas is hard. We need someone to stay here to guard the house, manage the deli, and watch over our things." "I'm your daughter, too," Chloe replied. Daniel's face winced in pain when he heard that, but Martha stood her ground. "We know that. That's exactly why we are trusting you with the house." Chloe smiled, but it was the kind of smile entirely devoid of joy. "Trusting me? Or abandoning me?" No one answered. Outside, the airport shuttle van that Charlie had booked honked its horn. 3 loud, impatient honks. It felt like the universe was rushing to end this final scene. "Mum, we're late. We might get held up at immigration if the lines are long." Taylor panicked. "We won't get held up," Martha said confidently. "All our papers are perfect. Charlie took care of everything." At the mention of Charlie's name, Chloe noticed a flash of anxiety in Daniel's eyes. It seemed like even he wasn't entirely sure about the documents they were using. But, as always, he said nothing. Martha pulled out her phone. "Let's take a quick picture before we leave. For the memories." The 5 of them huddled near the front door. Daniel, Martha, Taylor, Carter, and Avery. Chloe remained standing by the kitchen, trapped between the sink and the old dining table. As Taylor took the selfie, Chloe watched them smile as if they were a complete family, as if no one was being left behind, as if her existence had been completely erased. "Perfect," Taylor said, checking the photo, captioning it. "New journey with my whole family." Chloe looked at her. "Whole family?" Taylor paused, then quickly rolled her eyes. "Oh, whatever. It's just a habit." At that moment, Chloe wanted to scream. She wanted to yell about the countless nights she stayed up late, just to help pay their bills. About how many times she sacrificed her own college projects just to pay for Avery's tuition. About how many of Taylor's clothes she had washed. About how many of Carter's lies she had covered up. About how many times she just needed a hug, but got a list of chores instead. But when she opened her mouth, nothing came out. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she had already said too much over the years, and absolutely no one had ever listened. Daniel walked over to Chloe. He was holding the house keys and a small white envelope. "Chloe," he said, his voice dropping low. "Watch over the house for now. Don't let any strangers in. Open the deli if you have the time. If you can't, just call Mr. Higgins at the next stall." Chloe looked at the envelope. "What is this?" "A little cash to get you through the week." She took it. When she peeked inside, it was barely $500 to cover the house, food, commute, electricity, water, and the deli expenses. $500 in exchange for years of her blood, sweat, and tears. "Dad," she whispered. "Is this it?" Before Daniel could answer, Martha yelled from the door. "Oh, come on, Chloe. You're not high maintenance. You know how to survive. Besides, there's still food in the fridge." Daniel took a deep breath. It looked like he wanted to say something else. It looked like a tiny, microscopic part of his heart wanted to fight. But he was defeated by his own cowardice, the rush of the moment, and his lifelong habit of avoiding conflict. So instead of hugging his daughter, instead of asking for forgiveness, instead of promising, "We will come back for you," the words that came out of his mouth were the words that finally broke Chloe completely. "Just eat whatever leftovers are in the fridge. Don't spend too much money." Silence. It was as if all the sound in the house had been vacuumed out. The zipping of bags, the honking outside, Taylor's whining, Carter's arrogance, everything blurred into white noise. All Chloe could hear were the words: leftovers, leftover food, leftover daughter, leftover love. She felt her fingers turn to ice. She was still holding the envelope, but she couldn't feel it anymore. Chloe looked at Daniel. There was shame on his face, but not enough to take the words back. She looked at Martha, completely heartless. She looked at her siblings. Only Avery had the decency to look away. Taylor looked annoyed and fixed her lipstick. Carter pretended he was deaf. And right there, in the most painful moment of her entire life, Chloe smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy. It wasn't a smile of forgiveness. It was the smile of someone who was finally done trying to prove her worth to people who were absolutely committed to misunderstanding her. "Okay," she said. "Have a safe flight." Daniel froze. He looked more devastated by her calm response than if she had thrown a screaming fit. "Chloe," he whispered. But Martha was already turning around. "Let's go. We don't have time." One by one, the family walked out the door. Carter dragged his loud suitcase across the concrete. Taylor was already posting her photos online. Avery briefly looked back at Chloe. "Bye, sis," she said weakly. Chloe looked at her youngest sister. For a split second, she hoped she would hear a tiny "I'm sorry." But nothing followed. Martha yelled Avery's name, and she ran to the van. Daniel was the last to step out. He held onto the doorknob, looking like he wanted to turn back. But when the van honked one last time, he pulled the door shut. Click, a simple sound of a lock turning. But to Chloe, it was the sound of her entire childhood being permanently sealed away. She remained standing in the living room for seconds, then a minute, maybe longer. She didn't move. She didn't cry. She just stared at the door her own family had shut in her face. Then, very slowly, she walked into the kitchen. She opened the refrigerator. Just like Daniel said, there was food. A small plastic container of old meatloaf swimming in congealed grease. A half-empty plate of hard, cold rice. A single piece of fried fish, mostly bones. A half-empty bottle of water, and behind it, a bowl of soup that already smelled sour. As Chloe stared into the fridge, she suddenly remembered all the meals she had skipped, just so her family could eat. The nights she ate last, making sure Avery and Carter had full plates. The dinners where Martha would say, "Chloe, we're short on food, you'll just have to manage." The times she saved the best cuts of meat for them, while she survived on broth and scraps. And now, literally, scraps were all they left her. She took out the container of meatloaf. She opened it. She smelled it. It was spoiled. For the very first time in her life, she did not compromise herself. She didn't say, "It's still edible." She didn't say, "What a waste." She didn't say, "I'll just force it down." She carried every single container of spoiled food to the trash can and threw it all away. Then she sat down on the small wooden chair in the kitchen. Her hands were trembling as she pulled her phone from her pocket. She stared at Liam's name in her contacts for a few seconds. Liam Miller. Over the past few months, they had grown closer. It wasn't sudden, and it wasn't a fairy tale. It started with simple conversations at the diner, with him helping fix a broken light behind the shop, with him buying coffee, even though she knew it was just an excuse to see her. Until one night, Liam confessed that he wasn't just a corporate drone. He was the owner of a private aviation terminal and logistics firm. Chloe didn't change the way she treated him after finding out. She never asked for money. She never asked him to buy her anything. In fact, she distanced herself at first, terrified he would think she was using him. But Liam stayed. "I'm not helping you because I pity you," he had told her. "I'm here because I see how strong you are. But just because you're strong doesn't mean you have to be alone." Now, for the very first time, she needed to believe that. She pressed call. 2 rings in, Liam answered. "Chloe?" His voice was thick with worry. "Why are you calling so early? Are you okay?" That was when Chloe's lips began to quiver. She tried to speak, but it took a few seconds for her voice to break through. "Liam, they left." The line went dead silent. "All of them?" he asked. "Yes," she choked out. "My dad, my mom, Taylor, Carter, Avery. All of them. And they left you behind." Chloe took a shaky breath. "Yes. My dad told me to just eat the leftover scraps in the fridge." Liam went silent again. He didn't scream. He didn't swear. But when he finally spoke, his voice vibrated with a terrifying suppressed rage. "Where are you right now?" "At home. Is anyone with you?" "No." "Lock the doors. Drink a glass of water. I am on my way." "Liam, I didn't call you to start a war." "I'm not going to start a war," he said, his voice low and unyielding. "But I am absolutely not going to let them treat you like scraps." "Chloe, tell me the truth. Do you still want to chase after them and beg them to take you?" Chloe looked at the trash can where she dumped the spoiled food. She looked at the front door, at the scuff marks from the luggage wheels on the floor, at the house she took care of for years, which had never ever been a safe space for her. "No," she answered. "Then let me help you do this the right way," Liam said. "Not for revenge. For protection." She didn't fully understand what he meant by that. Not until a few minutes later, while she was still on the phone with him, an unknown number beeped in. She ignored it. Then another. And another. "Chloe," Liam said over the phone, "do you know exactly what flight they're on?" "Not exactly. But I heard them last night. Early Morning International. Cousin Charlie is supposed to be handling their documents." "Charlie? He's the fixer?" "Yes." Liam took a deep breath. "Chloe. Yesterday, my terminal network flagged a batch of private passenger assistance requests. There were several financial declarations that didn't match the supporting documents. I had no idea it was your family." Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. "What does that mean?" "It means they aren't going anywhere if their papers are forged. And if they used your money, or your name, on any of those documents, this requires a serious legal investigation." "Liam, they're going to say this is my fault. They'll say that because it's the easiest thing to do. But that doesn't make it the truth." While they were talking, Chloe's phone began buzzing uncontrollably. She saw Taylor's name pop up. She ignored it. Then Carter. Then Mom. Then Dad. Then Avery. Almost without pausing. On the other side of the city, at the international airport, absolute chaos was unfolding. At the passenger processing area, the Vance family was standing at the counter, carrying all their luggage and the arrogance they brought from the house. Just minutes earlier, Martha was completely relaxed. She was even showing Taylor the best angles for her airport social media story. "Let's do a candid shot," she had said, "so everyone knows we're leaving for good." But the moment the agent scanned their documents, the staff's face completely changed. "Ma'am, sir, please step aside. We need further verification." "Verification?" Martha demanded. "Isn't everything clear? We have a consultant handling this, Charlie Revamonte." They called Charlie. First ring, no answer. Second ring, nothing. Third ring, his phone was turned off. The airport supervisor arrived. Miss Santiago, a strict, highly professional woman who was used to dealing with loud passengers. She was holding a tablet and flanked by 2 security agents. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance," she said calmly. "We need to clarify certain financial and travel support documents. Some of your entries are highly inconsistent." Martha turned red with fury. "What do you mean inconsistent? Our papers are complete." We have our declared family funds right there. Yes, but they require supporting proof, the supervisor stated. There are source entries linked directly to the account activity of a Chloe Vance. Is she traveling with your party today? It was as if a bucket of ice water was dumped over Daniel's head. Martha froze, but quickly doubled down on her pride. She is our daughter, but she is not traveling with us. What difference does that make? Then we need direct authorization and clarification from her, confirming that her income and account history were legally authorized to be used as part of your financial support documentation. Taylor's eyes widened in horror. Mom, what is this? Shut up, Martha hissed. Carter, who had been leaning casually against his suitcase, started to panic. Dad, are they not letting us on the plane? Daniel was sweating profusely. Call Chloe. Right now. That was when the first call came to the house. Chloe watched her father's name flash on the screen. She stared at it until the call dropped. Then came her mother's call. Then Taylor's. Back to back. Suddenly, she was the most important person in the world, simply because they needed something from her. Martha texted, Chloe, pick up the phone. We just need to fix something. Taylor texted, Chloe, please, do you know Liam Miller? They keep mentioning him here. Please help. Carter texted, you are sick if you don't help us right now. Chloe read the messages, but she didn't reply. Not because she wanted them to suffer, but because for the first time in her life, she wasn't jumping into the fire to save them from a mess they created. A few minutes later, the calls stopped. She thought it was over. But then a voicemail popped up from Avery. She was sobbing. Chloe, please pick up. Mom is screaming. I'm so scared. Chloe closed her eyes. Her heart broke for Avery. But she remembered her own terror from just a few hours ago. No one hugged her. No one asked, Chloe, are you okay? No one chose her. Liam arrived about 20 minutes later. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a simple black button-down shirt. But the way he carried himself radiated control and heavy responsibility. He brought his driver and a legal advisor named Maya, who was carrying a thick folder. He knocked. When Chloe opened the door, she finally let her tears fall. I'm sorry, she said immediately. I don't want to be a burden. Liam didn't say a word. He just stepped inside and gently held her shoulders. Chloe, look at me. She looked up. You are not a burden. You are the one who has been carrying their dead weight. Chloe cried harder. For the first time today, someone wasn't blaming her for the pain she was feeling. They walked into the living room. Liam saw the inside of the fridge, practically empty. The trash can filled with spoiled food. The tiny envelope with a few pathetic bills on the counter. And the chaotic mess left in the living room. He didn't speak, but his jaw clenched so hard it looked like it could snap. Chloe's phone rang again. Dad. She didn't answer. A moment later, a new voicemail appeared. She played it on speaker, with Liam and Maya listening. Chloe, sweetheart. Daniel's voice was trembling. Please, answer us. There's just a small problem at the airport. They just need to speak to you. We didn't know Charlie used your records for the documents. He handled everything. Please, sweetheart. Immediately after, a voicemail from Martha played. Louder. Unclear. Chloe, if you are doing this to get back at us, remember that we are your family. Do not humiliate us here. Chloe smiled bitterly. Family, she whispered. They only remember we're family when they're the ones being humiliated. She sat down at the kitchen table, the same chair she sat in earlier while staring at spoiled food. But now, she wasn't alone. Liam was sitting across from her. Maya was beside her. And a few minutes later, Mrs. Nora and Jake arrived, after Liam had called them so Chloe would have familiar, comforting faces around. Sweetheart, Mrs. Nora said, rushing in, out of breath. We're here. That was when Chloe finally surrendered. Mrs. Nora wrapped her in a tight hug. It wasn't a glamorous hug, it wasn't dramatic, but it was whole. It was real. It was warm. I can't do this anymore, Chloe sobbed. You can, Mrs. Nora whispered, but you don't have to do it alone anymore. At the airport, the family had been on hold for over 30 minutes. Martha was losing her mind dialing the phone. Taylor was practically crying because she had to delete her new life abroad post. Carter was cursing Charlie's name loudly. Avery was sitting quietly in the corner. And Daniel was staring at his phone, relentlessly calling the daughter he had just abandoned. When Chloe checked her call log, she couldn't believe it. 100 missed calls. From the people who, just this morning, wouldn't even let her stand in a family picture. From the people who left her with rotten food. From the people she spent her entire life waiting for, just hoping they would tell her she mattered. She took a deep breath. She picked up the phone. Liam thought she was going to call them back, but she didn't. She turned off the ringer and placed the phone face down on the table. I'm not talking to them while they're angry, and I'm not going to help them lie. Liam nodded. Exactly. But I don't want to be like them, she added. If there's a legal issue that needs clearing up, I'll face it. But not today. Not while my hands are still shaking. Then we do it properly, Maya interjected. There's a process, there's paperwork, and most importantly, you have rights. Jake stood up and opened a window to let some fresh air in. Mrs. Nora went straight to the stove and started cooking a warm pot of chicken noodle soup, using the ingredients she brought. Liam quietly placed a glass of water in front of Chloe. Drink this. As Chloe held the glass, she suddenly realized the massive difference in her reality. This morning, her family left her with scraps. Now, she was surrounded by people giving her things that were fresh, warm, and enough. While she was sipping the water, her phone lit up again. A new text from Daniel. Sweetheart, forgive me. What we did was wrong. Please, just talk to me. Chloe stared at the message for a long time. Her chest felt incredibly heavy. Her heart wasn't ready to forgive. She wasn't ready to listen to their excuses. But one thing was crystal clear to her now. She was never going back to being the old Chloe. The Chloe who ran the second she was called. The Chloe who stayed silent when she was hurt. The Chloe who begged to be taken back after being abandoned. She slowly stood up, took the trash bag containing the spoiled meatloaf, tied it tightly, and threw it in the large dumpster outside. When she came back, a steaming bowl of Mrs. Nora's soup was waiting for her on the table. Eat up, kiddo, the older woman smiled. Chloe sat down. She picked up the spoon, and with the first bite, her tears fell again. Not just out of sadness, but because she finally understood. Sometimes, the wrong people have to walk away from you, so you can finally see the people who were meant to stay. While her family was throwing tantrums at the airport because they suddenly needed her. In that tiny, humble kitchen, the new Chloe was being born, a woman who no longer ate scraps, who no longer accepted leftover love, and who would never again let her worth be measured by people who didn't know how to love her completely. Before we continue with our story, leave a comment telling us where you are from and what time you are watching right now. Because, in this part of the story, we'll see that not all apologies come from genuine regret. Sometimes, people only apologize because they can no longer control the person they used to abuse. The bowl of soup in front of Chloe was still hot when her phone lit up again on the table. She wasn't surprised by the endless notifications anymore. Since this morning, her family's names hadn't stopped flashing on the screen. Dad, Mom, Taylor, Carter, Avery. Earlier, every single call felt like a knife twisting in her chest. Now, it felt different. It still hurt, but she wasn't trembling with the urge to answer immediately. For the first time in her life, she was the one in control of her own time. She was still sitting in the small kitchen of their house. Mrs. Nora was beside her, wiping down the table. Jake was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, looking serious despite usually being the jokester. Liam Miller sat across from her. Quiet, but his presence commanded the room. Next to him was Maya, his legal advisor, holding her folder of documents. Chloe, you don't have to answer if you're not ready, Maya said softly. Chloe looked at the screen. The new text was from Daniel. Sweetheart, we are heading back. They didn't let us through. We need to talk. She stared at the message for a long time. We are heading back. They acted as if this was still their home. as if it was perfectly natural for them to walk back in, yell, make excuses, and expect her to swallow it all. But the air in the house had changed. Even the old walls seemed to be listening, waiting to see what the woman who was never allowed to make a choice was finally going to do. "They're on their way back," Chloe announced. Jake cursed under his breath, then quickly apologized. "Sorry, but that is unbelievable. They literally abandoned you at 4 in the morning, and now they're coming back because they got caught?" "Jake," Mrs. Nora warned gently, though she knew the young man was absolutely right. Maya stood up and carefully spread a few documents on the table. "Chloe, before they get here, you need to understand your basic rights. This isn't about starting a fight. It's just so they can't force you into signing anything or admitting to things you don't understand." Chloe frowned. "Do I have to sign something?" "It's highly likely they will try to make you sign a retroactive statement, claiming you consented to them using your income records as proof of family funds," Maya explained. "Or they might say you were fully aware of what Charlie was doing. That's why it is crucial that you do not sign a single piece of paper without legal guidance." Chloe looked at Liam. "I honestly didn't know they used my name, and I think I can prove it." She walked over to a battered drawer near the kitchen counter. She pulled out a small envelope where she kept her diner pay stubs, receipts from her online freelance gigs, and several bank transfer records she rarely paid attention to. She used to think those papers were just proof of her exhaustion. Now, she realized they were the ultimate proof of how long she had been exploited by her own family. "There's more," Chloe said. "I have receipts of the electricity bills I paid, Avery's tuition fees, and the debts I settled for the deli. I also have screenshots of Mom's text messages every time she demanded money." "Good," Maya nodded. "Keep all of it safe. We will make copies." They hadn't even finished organizing the documents when they heard the screech of tires outside. Jake peeked through the blinds. "They're here," he said, his jaw tightening. Outside, the airport shuttle van had returned. The same van that, just hours ago, was full of arrogant dreams of a new life overseas. Now, the doors slammed heavily. Martha was the first to step out. Her hair was a mess. The high society posture she paraded around at dawn was completely gone. Next was Taylor. Her eyes were swollen from crying, still clutching the designer passport pouch that was completely useless now. Carter aggressively dragged his suitcase, stomping his feet, clearly furious. Avery was dead silent, looking down, holding her travel pillow, which now looked like a tragic symbol of a canceled dream. Daniel was the last to step out. He moved slowly. Every step he took toward the house seemed weighed down by profound shame. When the front door swung open, Chloe did not stand up. In the past, the moment her family arrived, she would scramble to her feet. She would take their bags, ask if they wanted water, arrange their shoes. Today, she remained seated, holding the glass of water Liam had given her. "Chloe," Martha barked, her voice immediately hitting a high octave. "What on earth did you do?" Liam looked up. He didn't say a word, but his icy glare was enough to make Martha take half a step back. "I didn't do anything," Chloe answered, calmly. "Nothing?" Martha raised an eyebrow. "They didn't let us through the airport because of you. They said they needed to speak with you. They needed your authorization. Why didn't you answer our calls?" "Because you abandoned me," Chloe replied. The room went dead silent. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't an angry outburst, but it hit them so much harder because it was quiet, direct, stripped of any drama. Daniel looked at the floor. "Dad," Chloe continued, "this morning, your final instruction to me was to eat the leftover scraps in the fridge. And now, suddenly, I'm your daughter again?" It looked as if someone had physically slapped Daniel across the face. His eyes watered, but he had no response. "Chloe, this is no time for theatrics," Martha interrupted. "We have a massive problem. We are family. You need to fix this." "Forged immigration documents are not my problem," Chloe said. "And I never gave you permission to use my bank history or my income for your visa applications." Taylor turned to Martha in shock. "Mom, you used Chloe's records? We didn't use them maliciously, Martha snapped defensively. We just included them as overall family income. That is completely normal. She is our daughter. But you didn't include me in the trip, Chloe pointed out. Taylor fell silent. Even she couldn't find a way to justify that. Carter violently dropped his suitcase. So what now? You're going to make us suffer just because you're bitter you got left behind. Jake slowly pushed himself off the doorframe. Hey, watch your tone. Who the hell are you? Carter sneered. This is family business. Family? Jake scoffed. This morning, you left her behind like a guard dog. Now, you're playing the family card? Carter took a step forward, looking for a fight, but Liam stood up. Liam didn't need to raise his voice or puff his chest. His sheer presence made Carter freeze in his tracks. No one is going to scream at Chloe in this house, Liam said, his voice low but razor-sharp. Martha stared at Liam. It seemed she was finally processing exactly who was standing in her kitchen. Are you? Liam Miller? She asked, her tone suddenly shifting, trying to sound diplomatic. Are you the owner of the private terminal? Liam didn't answer immediately. He looked at Chloe first, silently asking for her permission to speak. When Chloe gave a subtle nod, he turned back to the family. I am Liam, but I am not here as your corporate connection. I am here as Chloe's boyfriend. And I absolutely refuse to let you use her as a shield to cover up your crimes. Taylor's eyes widened. Boyfriend? She looked Chloe up and down, utterly in disbelief. It felt like a personal insult to her that the sister they had always treated like dirt was loved by a man with status, power, and real influence. Martha immediately changed her tune. Oh, is that so, Chloe? Why didn't you tell us? If you had just told us, everything would have been so much smoother. Liam, sweetie, maybe you can pull some strings for us. This is just a huge misunderstanding. Charlie handled the paperwork. We had no idea. I am not the one you need to talk to, Liam stated firmly. Everyone turned their eyes back to Chloe. The woman they had abandoned in the kitchen just hours ago was now the only person holding the power to save them. The daughter, who wasn't allowed in the family picture, was now the center of their reality. Chloe sat up straight. In front of her lay the receipts, the screenshots, and the papers she had hidden for so long. She picked up one of the receipts. This is the tuition fee I paid for Avery when you claimed you had no money. Avery looked down, her eyes tearing up. Chloe picked up another paper. This is the bank transfer I sent you, Mom, to pay the meat supplier. You promised to pay me back at the end of the month. You never did. Martha couldn't meet her eyes. And these, Chloe added, are the electricity bills. I paid them for 3 consecutive months because Dad said the deli was going bankrupt. I never threw it in your faces. But you took all of my hard work and submitted it to the embassy to make it look like you had enough family funds. How could you use my blood and sweat to fund a life without me? No one answered. Daniel collapsed into an old wooden chair near the door. His hands were shaking violently. Chloe, I swear to God, I didn't know Charlie did that. But you knew you were abandoning me, Chloe replied. You knew I wasn't on that flight. You knew it was my money keeping this house afloat. You knew I carried the weight of this family on my back, and you let it happen anyway. The silence that followed was agonizing. Even Carter, who was so arrogant a moment ago, couldn't find a single word. Suddenly, Mrs. Higgins, their elderly neighbor, walked in through the open door. She was carrying a small paper bag of freshly baked muffins. Chloe, sweetheart, are you okay? I'm okay, Mrs. Higgins, Chloe answered softly. Mrs. Higgins looked at the luggage, the swollen eyes of the family, and the legal papers scattered on the table. She didn't need an explanation to understand the dynamics. She had spent years watching Chloe cry silently in the backyard while hanging the laundry late at night. Stop torturing this poor girl, Mrs. Higgins snapped at the parents. She has been exhausted from serving you for years. Mind your own business, Martha hissed. It is my business, Mrs. Higgins fired back. Because when your daughter cries herself to sleep at night, we are the ones who hear her, not you. Martha's face hardened, but she kept her mouth shut. In the middle of the heavy tension, Daniel's phone rang. It was Charlie. He answered it immediately and put it on speaker. Charlie, where are you? What the hell did you do with our papers? Charlie's voice echoed through the room. He sounded panicked and out of breath. Daniel, listen to me. You just need to make Chloe sign a retroactive authorization. Tell them she knew about the accounts. If she doesn't, I'm going to jail, and you are going down with me. Did you forge the numbers? Daniel yelled. They're not forged. I just adjusted them to pass the threshold. You know how it is. It's just a hustle. Just make her sign the damn paper. Maya, the legal advisor, snatched the phone from Daniel. This call is currently being witnessed by legal counsel. Any further attempt to coerce Miss Chloe Vance into signing fraudulent authorization documents will be used against you in federal court. Charlie went completely silent on the other end. 2 seconds later, he hung up. That was when the reality of the situation truly sank in. This wasn't just family drama anymore. They had crossed into felony territory. Chloe took a deep, shaky breath. I am not signing a lie. Chloe, please. Taylor burst into tears. Everything will be ruined. My plans, my sponsorships. Taylor, Chloe cut her off. When you captioned your picture, whole family, you completely forgot I existed. But now that you need my signature to save your skin, suddenly you remember I'm your sister. Taylor sobbed into her hands. For the first time in her life, she had no insult to throw back. Avery slowly walked forward. Chloe, I'm sorry. Chloe paused. She looked at the youngest sibling. Yes, Avery was young, but that didn't mean she played no part in Chloe's suffering. However, looking at her face now, there was genuine fear and shame. I didn't know everything, Avery cried. I thought you were okay with staying behind. Because you're always okay with everything. That sentence felt like a dagger to the chest. Because that is the ultimate curse of people who choose to be strong. Everyone else assumes they don't feel pain. I wasn't okay, Chloe whispered. I haven't been okay in a very long time. Avery broke down weeping. Martha, however, still couldn't swallow her massive pride. So what do you want us to do? Get on our knees? Beg for forgiveness? Fine, we are sorry. Are you happy now? Liam looked at Chloe, his eyes full of concern. But Chloe didn't need anyone to defend her right now. She stood up. I am not happy, Mom. There is absolutely no joy in being abandoned by your own family. There is no joy in being treated like a tool. There is no joy in being summoned only because you need a signature. She slowly picked up her worn-out backpack from the chair. She placed the envelope of receipts, her dream notebook, and her phone inside. Where are you going? Daniel asked in a panic. I'm staying at Mrs. Nora's diner for a while. Stay here, Daniel pleaded. This is your home. Chloe offered a tragic smile. It's your home now. Because just this morning, I was nothing but a security guard to you. Those words hit the entire room like a sledgehammer. Daniel took a trembling step forward. Sweetheart, I was wrong. We were so wrong. I don't know how to fix this, but please, don't leave. Chloe looked at her father, the man she loved, despite how many times he let her down. The man who showed her affection when no one was watching, but never chose her when it actually mattered. Dad, Chloe said softly, if you are truly sorry, do not stop me from walking out that door. Just let me breathe. Daniel froze. Slowly, he lowered his hand. Martha, completely unhinged, scoffed. So that's it? You're running away because you bagged a rich boyfriend? Chloe turned to face her mother one last time. I am not leaving because I have a rich boyfriend. I am leaving because I am your daughter. But you raised me to be your maid. There was no screaming, no slapping, no hysterical meltdown. But every single word Chloe spoke stripped away decades of lies in that house. She walked toward the front door. Liam didn't grab her hand to pull her along. He let her walk out first. Because this was the first step she needed to take entirely on her own. Mrs. Nora followed, holding her container of soup. Jake picked up Chloe's old laptop bag. Even though he knew Carter had stolen and sold the laptop months ago, leaving nothing but a charger and some loose papers inside. Before stepping outside completely, Chloe stopped and looked back. I am not going to drag your names through the mud, she said. I won't try to get you arrested. But I am also not going to save you from your own lies. If you want to fix your problem, start by telling the truth. She looked directly at Daniel. Return the money you stole from me. Clear the loans you put in my name. Face the authorities about Charlie. And never, ever call me ungrateful, just because I finally refused to be used. With that, she walked out into the morning light. The sun was already shining. It had only been a few hours since her family left her for dead, but Chloe felt like she had aged 10 years. Outside the gate, Mrs. Higgins was wiping tears from her eyes. Jake quietly opened the door to Liam's SUV. Mrs. Nora held Chloe's hand tightly. Sweetheart, you'll stay in the room above the diner. It's small, but it is peaceful. Chloe nodded. Thank you. Before she got into the car, she heard a loud, gut-wrenching sob echo from inside the house. It was Daniel. She didn't know if he was crying out of shame, fear, or genuine regret. But she didn't turn back to comfort him. She had spent her entire life comforting everyone else while she bled. Today, she needed to comfort herself. During the ride to the diner, Chloe was completely silent. She just stared out the window. They passed the local market where she had carried heavy boxes for years. They passed the college campus where she attended classes, utterly exhausted. They passed the church where she had once asked God why it was so hard for her own family to love her. It felt like every place they passed was a fragment of the old Chloe. Are you scared? Liam asked from the driver's seat. It took her a while to answer. Yes. But you did it anyway. He glanced at her. That's what bravery is. When they arrived at the diner, Mrs. Bennett, her old teacher, rushed out to meet them. She hugged Chloe fiercely. Chloe, you're not my student anymore, but I am so, so proud of you. That was when Chloe finally broke down again. Not because she was weak, but because it was the very first time she heard an older figure say the words she had spent her whole life waiting for her parents to say. The room above the diner was tiny. There was a simple mattress, a small desk with scratched edges, a rattling electric fan, and a window facing the street. It wasn't as big as her family's house. There was no fancy furniture, no closet full of clothes. But it had silence. It had safety. It had space where no one would ever scream her name, just to order her around. Chloe dropped her bags. She took out her notebook and opened it to the page she had written on. One day, I will build a place for people who have nowhere else to go. She brushed her fingers over the ink. For the first time, it didn't feel like a distant, impossible dream. It felt like day one. Meanwhile, back at the Vance household, the family was left drowning in grounded luggage, forged documents, and a reality they could no longer run from. Martha was sitting in the living room, still furious, but her aura of absolute power was completely shattered. Taylor was quietly deleting her new journey with my whole family posts. Carter was frantically trying to call Charlie, but getting no response. Avery walked into the kitchen and stared at the trash can filled with spoiled food. That was when she truly comprehended how unbelievably cruel they had been to her older sister. And Daniel remained standing by the front door, clutching the house keys. Just eat the leftovers, he whispered to himself. For the first time, he heard the full, crushing weight of his own words. As the sun began to set, two completely different lives started taking shape. In one house, a family was left to face the brutal consequences of the abuse they had swept under the rug for years. And in a tiny room above a diner, Chloe sat on the edge of her bed, exhausted, wounded, and still terrified. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't trapped. Her battle wasn't over. There would be endless legal meetings, tears, and heavy days ahead. But tonight, as she lay on that small mattress, listening to the faint hum of the diner below, she smiled, even with tears staining her cheeks. Because finally, she was no longer the daughter who was only called when needed. She was Chloe Vance, the woman who finally chose herself. Before we move to the next part of our story, drop a comment telling us where you are from and what time it is there. Because in this chapter, we will see that walking away from a toxic home doesn't magically fix everything overnight. Sometimes, That's just where the real healing begins. The next morning, after leaving the house she took care of for years, Chloe Vance woke up in the tiny room above Mrs. Nora's diner. The room was nothing special. Flimsy curtains, a rattling fan, a mattress nowhere near as soft as the hotels her family dreamed of visiting. But when she opened her eyes, the feeling was entirely different. Silence. No Martha screaming. No Taylor giving orders. No Carter stomping around. No Avery whining to have her hair brushed or her food cut. No Daniel passively throwing all his responsibilities onto her shoulders. For the very first time, Chloe woke up with absolutely no one to serve. She lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling. She didn't know if she was supposed to feel light or devastated, because even though her house was a prison, her entire life was tied to it. That was where she learned to walk, where she read her first book, where she first dreamed. But it was also where she learned to swallow her tears, where she learned she was never enough, and where she was ultimately abandoned by the people supposed to protect her. A soft knock came at the door. "Chloe, are you awake, kiddo?" It was Mrs. Nora. Chloe sat up and fixed her hair. "Yes, Mrs. Nora." The older woman walked in, carrying a tray with freshly baked muffins, eggs, and hot coffee. She placed it on the small table and gave a warm smile. "These aren't leftovers, okay? I made this fresh, just for you." Chloe didn't expect that simple sentence to make her chest ache again. She looked at the food and swallowed hard. Her whole life, she was used to eating last. If there was good food, it went to her siblings. If there was barely anything left, she got the scraps. If money was tight, she starved. Now, someone had brought her a meal specifically made for her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. Mrs. Nora sat on the edge of the bed. "You don't have to rush out of bed today. Take your time. But when you're ready, there are people downstairs waiting to help you. Not to boss you around, to help you." Chloe nodded. "I'm just overwhelmed. I'm so used to being the one serving everyone." "That's exactly why we're going to teach you how to be served." Downstairs in the diner, Jake and Mrs. Bennett were waiting. Jake had brought a small box of school supplies, pens, notebooks, folders. "New beginnings require new paper," he grinned. Mrs. Bennett had a list of counseling centers and university financial aid offices that could help Chloe continue her degree while she sorted out her life. It wasn't long before Liam Miller arrived too. He didn't burst through the doors like a prince in a fairy tale. He didn't have a massive convoy, and he didn't bring expensive jewelry. He walked in carrying a simple paper grocery bag, filled with vitamins, basic snacks, and a brand new bath towel. "I overthought what you might need," he admitted, looking slightly embarrassed. "I have no idea how to buy a towel for someone." But Maya said it was practical. For the first time since her world collapsed, Chloe let out a genuine, quiet laugh. "Thank you. I actually really need that." Liam looked at her as if hearing her laugh was the greatest achievement in the world, but he didn't make a big scene out of it. He didn't hug her unexpectedly. He didn't tell her to just forget her family and move on. Instead, he sat down at the opposite booth and pulled out a stack of documents. "I spoke with Maya," he began. "We don't need to rush this, but there are 3 things we have to lock down. First, secure your bank, school, and work records. Second, run a credit check to see if any loans were taken out under your name. Third, draft a formal legal statement declaring you never consented to your income being used for their visa applications." Chloe let out a heavy sigh. "It feels like so much." "It is," Liam replied softly, "but you don't have to do it alone anymore." From that day on, Chloe's new routine began. It wasn't easy, but it was drastically different from her old life. Her schedule no longer revolved around serving the Vance family. In the mornings, she helped at the diner, but not as an unpaid servant. Mrs. Nora paid her a fair wage. She forced Chloe to sit down when she looked tired, and scolded her if she skipped a meal. "You are not a machine," the old woman would frequently remind her. And even machines break down if they're overworked. In the afternoons, she and Maya combed through her documents. That was when Chloe uncovered another hidden wound she hadn't expected. There were several small online payday loans registered under her name. Individually, they weren't massive, but combined, it was a heavy debt. There was also a payment plan for a high-end electronics store, where she was listed as the primary guarantor. She had never bought a gadget in her life. When she saw Martha's name as the emergency contact on the loan applications, her hands started shaking. "She really used me," Chloe whispered. Maya didn't speak immediately. She let the young woman process the betrayal before saying, "We have legal remedies for this. It's considered identity fraud. But you have to brace yourself. Facing the truth doesn't always bring immediate relief. Sometimes, it hurts a lot more before it gets better." Maya was right. Because while Chloe was slowly piecing her life together, the Vance family was rapidly drowning in the consequences of their actions. Back at the house, the suitcases were never unpacked. They sat in the living room like monuments to a dead dream. Martha refused to leave the house for days, too embarrassed to face the neighbors. But instead of owning up to her mistakes, she spun a web of lies. "It's all Chloe's fault," Martha complained on the phone to a relative. "She got brainwashed by some rich boyfriend. She turned her back on us. The absolute nerve of that girl." Daniel overheard her from the kitchen. Usually, he would have stayed silent, but today, a heavy weight crushed his chest. "Martha," he said, his voice low. "Stop twisting the story." Martha stopped dead. "Excuse me?" I said, "Stop twisting the story. We are the ones who left without her. We are the ones who spent her money. We are the ones who forged documents behind her back." It was the first major crack in Daniel's wall of cowardice. "Oh, so now you want to be the righteous father?" Martha shrieked. "When we were detained at the airport, you did nothing. And now you're taking her side." "I should have taken her side years ago," Daniel said quietly. Martha couldn't formulate a response. Taylor, who was sitting on the stairs listening, buried her face in her hands. Carter violently kicked the front door open and stormed out, unwilling to listen to the blame game. Avery just sat silently at the kitchen island, staring at the refrigerator that was now completely empty. Since Chloe left, no one knew how to budget for groceries. No one restocked the pantry. No one woke up early to cook breakfast. It was only then that they realized the daughter, they treated like a ghost, was actually the main pillar holding their entire house up. Weeks passed. Chloe didn't return home, but that didn't mean she wasn't struggling. There were nights when she thought she was perfectly fine, only to wake up in a cold sweat, dreaming that Martha was screaming her name to scrub the floors. There were days at the diner when, if there was leftover food, her brain automatically forced her to take the smallest, burnt piece for herself. Whenever someone complimented her work, she would panic, not knowing how to accept praise. One evening, Liam found her sitting on an old crate behind the diner, clutching her dream notebook. "Chloe?" he called out softly. She quickly wiped her eyes. "I'm fine. I'm okay." Liam sat next to her on the crate, close enough to be there, but leaving enough space so she wouldn't feel crowded. "You don't have to say that to me every single time." Chloe let out a frustrated sigh. "I just don't know how to not be okay in front of people." "You can start practicing right now." They sat in silence for a few minutes. Inside the diner, they could hear the clinking of dishes as Mrs. Nora cleaned up. Out on the street, cars drove by. The world was moving normally, but inside Chloe, a war was still raging. "You know what the most annoying part is," she finally admitted. "I shouldn't miss them, but sometimes, I still do." "That's completely normal," Liam replied gently. "Just because someone broke your heart doesn't mean your love for them magically vanishes. It takes time." "But I feel so stupid," her voice cracked. "I feel like a pathetic little girl just waiting for her parents to love her properly. What if I never get better?" "You will," Liam promised. "We just aren't going to rush it." The next day, Mrs. Bennett introduced Chloe to Dr. Vivian, a psychologist who specialized in young adults overcoming family trauma and emotional neglect. At first, Chloe was terrified. She felt that going to therapy meant she was weak. But during their very first session, Dr. Vivian said something that anchored her. "Chloe, you are not broken. You are just exhausted from trying to survive in a place that constantly took from you, but never gave anything back. From then on, Chloe slowly learned the word boundaries, a word she never knew existed inside the Vance household. She learned that she could help people without draining herself entirely. She learned that forgiveness down the road didn't mean unlocking the door for them to hurt her again. She learned that it was possible to love her family while actively choosing to stay away from them. As Chloe began to heal, a new opportunity arrived. Liam was launching a community training program at his aviation terminal, geared towards working students, single parents, and out-of-school youth who wanted to learn logistics, customer service, and airport hospitality. It was a passion project his company had been developing for years, but they lacked a director who truly understood how to connect with applicants from rough backgrounds. "I want you to help me organize and run this," Liam told her one afternoon. "Not as a favor, as a job, with a salary, a contract, and a clear executive role." Chloe was shocked. "Me? But I have zero experience working in an airport." "You have experience with people," he answered. "And sometimes, that's infinitely more valuable." Through the program, Chloe met the people who would become her new chosen family. There was Brianna, a single mom who used to be a baggage handler and was desperate to get back to work after her husband abandoned her. There was Jackson, a former street kid who hung around the terminal and just wanted a stable job to send his little brother to school. There was Sarah, a brilliant but painfully shy scholar who was a wizard with numbers but terrified of job interviews. There was Mr. Owen, a former janitor who was stepping up to be a safety trainer. And there was Lily, a deaf applicant who the program hired interpreters for, so she could train in inventory management. On the day of the first orientation, Chloe was a nervous wreck. She stood at the podium holding her cue cards, reading them over and over. Liam stood at the back of the room. He didn't intervene. He wanted Chloe to see that she could stand on her own 2 feet. Chloe took a deep breath and looked at the crowd of applicants. "Good morning," she started, her voice shaking slightly before steadying. "My name is Chloe Vance. I didn't grow up with connections. I didn't grow up with people believing I would amount to anything. So, if there is anyone sitting in this room right now who thinks they aren't good enough, I want you to know something. Just because the people in your past couldn't see your value doesn't mean you are worthless." The entire room fell dead silent. Brianna looked down, wiping a tear from her cheek. Jackson gripped his pen tightly, his posture straightening. Sarah looked up and made eye contact with Chloe for the first time. At the back of the room, Liam couldn't hide his proud smile. From that day on, Chloe's pain finally found a purpose. It didn't mean her wounds disappeared, they were still there. But she used them to understand the wounds of others. When an applicant was too afraid to speak because they had been called stupid their whole life, she knew exactly how to talk to them. When a working student cried in her office because their family wasn't supporting them, she knew how to sit in silence with them without rushing their grief. When a trainee wanted to quit, she knew that sometimes all a person needed was a voice saying, "Try one more time, I'm right here with you." But while Chloe's reputation soared in the training program, Martha's bitterness spiraled out of control. She couldn't stomach the fact that the daughter she abandoned was slowly earning the deep respect of the community. Her anger boiled over when someone tagged her in a social media post about the terminal's training program. The photo showed Chloe, smiling brightly, surrounded by her trainees. The caption read, "Thank you to Miss Chloe Vance for believing we could start over." When Martha saw that, she nearly threw her phone across the room. "Miss Chloe Vance," she mocked bitterly. "Look at her acting like some saint." Cousin Charlie happened to be visiting secretly, trying to squeeze a few more dollars out of them before skipping town, as federal investigators were now looking into his fake visa operations. When he saw how furious Martha was, he smiled maliciously. "If you want to take back control of your daughter, you destroy her image." "What do you mean?" Martha asked. "It's easy. Make a post online. Say she was the one who abandoned you. Say she used her rich boyfriend to humiliate her poor, struggling parents. People love a sob story, especially when a mother is the victim." Martha should have stopped there. She should have realized she had already inflicted enough damage. But driven by ego, jealousy, and the terrifying realization that she had lost all power over Chloe, she agreed. The next evening, a massive post went viral from a newly created account. It featured an old, unflattering photo of Chloe doing laundry in their backyard. It included heavily edited screenshots of text messages and a lengthy caption that read, "This girl plays the victim online. But the truth is, she abandoned her struggling family the second she got a taste of money. She used her rich CEO boyfriend to legally harass her own parents and ruin our dreams. She has no gratitude for the family that raised her." Chloe didn't see the post immediately. Sarah was the first to notice it and showed it to Brianna. Brianna immediately called Jake. Within hours, the comments section was a war zone. Some people believed the lies, calling Chloe an ungrateful brat. Others were purely throwing hateful insults. When the news finally reached Chloe, she was in the training room, organizing certificates. She read the post. She didn't scream, but her breathing hitched, and her hands began to tremble violently. Suddenly, she was back in that old living room, standing in front of a mother who had the terrifying ability to make everything Chloe's fault. "Chloe," Liam said, rushing in when he saw her face. "Breathe." "They're still not done," she whispered, her voice breaking. I walked away. I stayed quiet. Why do they still have to destroy me? There was no easy answer. Because some people, when they can no longer control you, will try to control how everyone else sees you. Before Liam could even call his legal team to have the post taken down for defamation, something incredible happened. One by one, the people Chloe had helped began speaking up. Brianna posted a photo of them in the training room. "Miss Chloe didn't know me from anywhere, but she helped me get my life back together after my husband left me. She is the most genuine person I know." Jackson commented from his own account, "If it weren't for her, I'd still be on the streets. She never faked anything. She was the first person to treat me like a human being." Sarah uploaded a short video. Her voice was shaking, but her words were crystal clear. "I am usually terrified to speak, but I will speak today. Those lies are disgusting. Miss Chloe taught me not to be ashamed of who I am. Whoever posted that should be ashamed of themselves." Jake posted a long essay detailing how Chloe stayed up late to help his brother win a scholarship, asking for absolutely nothing in return. Mrs. Bennett gave a statement about Chloe's relentless work ethic and kindness since high school. Even Mrs. Nora, who barely knew how to use social media, had Mr. Owen record a video of her. "My name is Nora," she said, staring fiercely into the camera. "If anyone wants to know what kind of woman Chloe Vance is, come down to my diner. I'll tell you about the girl who worked her fingers to the bone for years, serving people who never deserved her." But the final, most shocking defense came from the person no one expected. Daniel. In the small living room of the Vance house, he had spent hours staring at the viral smear campaign. He knew Martha and Charlie were behind it, even if they denied it. Sitting across from him was Avery, weeping as she read the brutal comments about her sister. Taylor sat silently on the couch, eaten alive by her own guilt. Carter was pacing back and forth, unusually quiet. "Dad," Avery sobbed. "It's not true, right? Chloe isn't a monster." That was the moment Daniel's cowardice finally shattered for good. He took out his phone. He didn't know how to set up the camera properly, and he had to adjust it 3 times. When he pressed record, his voice shook. "My name is Daniel Vance. I am Chloe's father. If you are seeing posts tearing down my daughter, I am here to tell you it is all a lie. Chloe is not a bad daughter. We were bad parents." When Chloe saw the video in her office at the training center, she stopped breathing. Daniel continued in the video. "We abandoned her. We used her hard-earned money. We made plans to move overseas without her, and we forged financial documents using her name. On the day we tried to leave, I told her the cruelest thing a father could ever say. I told her to survive on the spoiled leftovers in our fridge. I can never take those words back. But I absolutely will not sit here and let her reputation be ruined for crimes that we committed." Chloe's hands shook violently as she held the phone. Around her, Liam, Brianna, Sarah, Jackson, Jake, Mrs. Nora, and Mrs. Bennet stood in absolute silence. They all knew this wasn't just a PR apology. This was the very first time in Chloe's life that someone in her family had stepped in front of a bullet for her, even if it meant destroying their own pride. Daniel's video ended with these words: "Chloe, sweetheart, I am not asking for your forgiveness today. I am just asking for the chance to fix what I broke." Chloe burst into tears. She didn't magically run back to her father. Her trauma wasn't instantly cured. She hadn't forgotten the years of abuse. But for the first time, a massive infected wound in her heart was finally exposed to fresh air. It still hurt, but it was no longer trapped in a cage of gaslighting and lies. That evening, the terminal hosted a small graduation event for the scholars. It was packed with trainees and their families. Chloe didn't expect Daniel to show up, but she spotted him standing at the very back of the crowd. He was wearing a faded polo shirt, holding an old cardboard box. Martha wasn't there. Charlie was long gone. It was just Daniel, and Avery standing quietly by his side. After the program, Daniel approached. He didn't try to hug her. He didn't force a reunion. He simply placed the box on the table in front of her. "Your things," he said softly. "The stuff you probably thought got thrown away. Your middle school medals. Your sketches for your dream cafe. Your old ribbons. I kept them, but I never showed them to you. I don't know why. Probably because I was a coward." Chloe slowly opened the box. There they were. Her academic medals she assumed Martha had thrown out. Her certificates, her old notebook, and a faded family photo from when they were kids. The only photo where she wasn't smiling, because she was holding a tray of food just outside the frame. "Why are you giving this to me now?" she asked, her voice a fragile whisper. "Because it took me this long to admit to myself that I always saw you," Daniel said, his eyes welling up with tears. "I saw you. I just chose not to defend you." A single tear rolled down Chloe's cheek. For years, she had fantasized about this exact confession. But now that it was happening, she realized it wasn't like the movies. There was no sweeping orchestral music. They weren't going to embrace and magically become a happy family. It was still heavy. It was still messy. There was still anger. But there was finally truth. "Dad," Chloe said, "I can't say that we're okay." Daniel nodded. "I know. I can't go back to the house. I will never force you. And I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you." Daniel looked down. "I will wait, even if it takes forever, even if that day never comes." Behind Daniel, Avery was crying silently. She took a hesitant step forward. "Chloe, can I hug you?" Chloe looked at her youngest sister. Her chest still ached with betrayal. But the girl looking back at her wasn't the spoiled brat who demanded the world. Her eyes held shame, fear, and genuine remorse. Chloe gave a slow nod. Avery threw her arms around her sister, hugging her fiercely, her small frame shaking. It wasn't a hug that erased the past, but it was enough to remind Chloe that people can change if they are forced to confront the monster in the mirror. At the end of the night, Chloe didn't go home with her family. She went back to her tiny room above Mrs. Nora's diner. A full year passed. A year filled with incredibly heavy days. Silent crying spells. Intense therapy sessions with Dr. Vivian. Exhausting legal meetings with Maya. And a very slow, very real process of getting back up. Healing wasn't instantaneous. There were still nights when Chloe would dream she was trapped in the kitchen, staring at the fridge, hearing her father tell her to eat the leftovers. But now, whenever she woke up from that nightmare, she knew exactly what to do. She would sit up, take a deep breath, hold the small silver key pendant Mrs. Nora had gifted her, a symbol of the new door she had unlocked for herself, and she would say out loud, "That's over. I don't live there anymore." In the span of that year, Chloe's world expanded massively. Liam's modest training program had evolved into a massive citywide initiative. From a handful of trainees, they had now graduated over 100 young adults, teaching them logistics, customer service, cafe operations, and financial literacy. Brianna was now the assistant coordinator. Jackson was a logistics team leader. Sarah was teaching bookkeeping to the new batch of scholars. Mr. Owen was the head of safety protocols. And Lily had become the very first deaf employee promoted to inventory manager. At the center of it all was Chloe, the director of the program they officially named the Terminal Haven. She didn't call it a haven because her life was perfect. She named it that because she knew exactly how agonizing it was to be homeless while living in the same house as your family. She wanted every single kid who walked through those doors to feel the one thing she was denied her entire childhood, the feeling that they belonged. One afternoon, while Chloe was signing certificates for their upcoming grand opening, Liam walked into her office. He was carrying 2 cups of dark roast coffee from Mrs. Nora's diner. Delivery for the busiest director in the entire city. Liam smiled, placing the cup on her desk. Chloe looked up and beamed. Director? I thought I was just the coordinator. You were the coordinator on month 1. Now, you're the heartbeat of this entire operation. Chloe blushed slightly. Even after a year, she was still getting used to compliments, but she had finally learned how to accept them without shrinking. Thank you, she said, but I couldn't have built this without you. I just gave you the tools, Liam corrected her. You built this because you chose to turn your pain into a bridge. Not everyone is brave enough to do that. Chloe looked down at the certificates on her desk. Names of kids who had been belittled, abandoned, and told they were worthless. In every name, she saw a reflection of her old self. Before she could reply, her phone buzzed. Dad. Seeing his name didn't trigger a panic attack anymore. Over the past year, Daniel had consistently shown up. It wasn't perfect, but he was trying. He was working as a warehouse assistant at a local supply company. Slowly but surely, he was paying back the money he and Martha had drained from Chloe's accounts. Sometimes it was $100, sometimes $200. But the amount didn't matter to Chloe. What mattered was that he had stopped running from his responsibilities. She answered the call. Hi, Dad. Hey, sweetheart. Daniel's voice was calm but slightly nervous. Are you free this Saturday? We'd really like to have dinner with you. Just a simple meal. If you're comfortable. If not, I completely understand. Chloe didn't answer right away. The man on the phone used to bark orders at her. Now, he was asking for her consent. It was a massive shift, but her heart was conditioned to be cautious. Is Mom going to be there? She asked. Daniel paused. Yes, she's here, and she really wants to see you. Chloe looked up at Liam. He hadn't heard the conversation, but he could read her face like a book. I don't know if I'm ready, Chloe said softly into the phone. That's okay, sweetheart. I'm not rushing you. And I'm not going to play the We're family card to guilt you into coming. I know that was wrong. It's just an invitation. The choice is entirely yours. Chloe closed her eyes. The old Daniel would never have said that. The old Daniel would have commanded her to come home to save face. This new Daniel actually respected her boundaries. Okay, Dad, she finally said. I'll come, but Liam is coming with me. That's perfectly fine, Daniel replied. Thank you, sweetheart. When she hung up, she let out a long exhale. Family dinner? Liam guessed. She nodded. On Saturday. Do you really want to go? He asked honestly. I don't know, she admitted. But I think I need to. Not to go back to how things were, but to prove to myself that I can face them without turning back into the old me. When Saturday arrived, they didn't drive to the old Vance house. The house had been sold months ago as part of the legal and financial cleanup. The profits were used to pay off debts, including the fraudulent loans taken out in Chloe's name. Daniel, Martha, Taylor, Carter, and Avery had moved into a much smaller, rented townhouse in a quiet, working-class neighborhood. There were no fancy curtains in the windows. There was no display cabinet filled with fake crystal glasses. There were no framed portraits pretending they were high society. When Chloe and Liam walked up to the door, Daniel opened it himself. He looked much thinner. His hair was significantly grayer, but his eyes were clearer than they had ever been. He didn't force a hug. He just stepped aside and smiled shyly. Thank you for coming. Good evening, Dad, Chloe replied. Inside, Taylor was quietly setting the table. she looked entirely different. The heavy makeup and designer clothes were gone. She wore a simple sweater, her hair in a messy bun, looking like someone who had finally learned what a hard day's work felt like. She was currently working as a booking assistant at a local travel agency. Carter was in the kitchen, opening food containers. The arrogant swagger was gone. After being forced to take a grueling warehouse job to help pay the bills, he learned that having an attitude didn't pay the rent. Avery was sitting at the table with a notebook. She had gone back to high school. Occasionally, she would text Chloe to ask for help with her math homework, but always politely and always with a thank you. And then there was Martha, the woman who used to have the loudest, most commanding voice in any room, was sitting quietly at the far end of the dining table. When she saw Chloe, she stood up. For several seconds, they just stared at each other. In a flash, the old Martha ran through Chloe's mind. The mother who always had an insult loaded, the mother who treated her like a servant, the mother who made sure she always felt inferior. But the woman standing in front of her didn't look powerful anymore. She looked exhausted. Her pride had been obliterated, and she had clearly spent the last year losing a war with her own conscience. "Chloe," Martha said softly. "Mom," Chloe replied. No hugs, no forced theatrics. They sat down at the table. The dinner was simple: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and warm dinner rolls. As Chloe looked at the food, she noticed something immediately. The portions were completely equal. There was no best piece, reserved specifically for Carter or Taylor. There were no scraps pushed to the side for her. She had her own plate, her own glass, and a chair right in the middle of the table. It was a tiny detail to anyone else, but to Chloe, it was monumental. As they ate, the silence was awkward but peaceful. Liam politely answered questions when asked, but he never dominated the conversation. He knew tonight wasn't about him. It was about Chloe and the people who broke her. Taylor was the first to speak. "Chloe," she said, putting her fork down, "I've been wanting to say this to your face for a long time. I'm sorry. Not just about the airport. I'm sorry for all the years I treated you like garbage. I was so jealous of you, even though I never admitted it. Because even when you were stuck in the kitchen, you actually had a direction in life. I was just playing dress up." Chloe looked at her older sister. She never expected to hear those words. "I honestly don't know how to process that yet," Chloe said truthfully. "That's okay," Taylor nodded. "I don't expect you to forgive me right now. I just need you to know that I finally realize how awful I was." Carter went next. He wasn't used to being vulnerable, so he awkwardly rubbed the back of his neck before sliding a plain white envelope across the table. "Here," he said. "It's not the full amount yet, but it's the first installment for the laptop. The one I stole and sold." Chloe stiffened. She had known for years that Carter took her laptop, but hearing him actually confess to it was jarring. "Why did you do it?" she asked. Carter looked down. "Because I was a selfish punk. I thought just because you never complained or fought back, it meant I could take whatever I wanted. I was wrong. I can't get the laptop back, but I'm going to pay you every single dollar I owe." Chloe didn't take the envelope immediately. She just stared at it. Not because she didn't want the money, but because she was processing the fact that her deeply entitled brother was finally taking accountability. After dinner, Avery walked up to her. She was holding a neatly folded letter. "Chloe," she said, "I wrote this down because I knew I'd start crying if I tried to say it." Chloe took the letter. She didn't read the whole thing right then, but her eyes caught the first line. "I am so sorry I let you be invisible, even though you were the one keeping me alive." Chloe's eyes filled with tears. "I really didn't know," Avery whispered, her voice shaking. "I thought it was just normal that you did everything for us. I only realized this year that you were just a kid too." Chloe reached out and gently squeezed Avery's hand. It wasn't a tight grip, but it was enough to let her know she was heard. The last to speak was Daniel. He stood up, walked into the kitchen, and brought back a small plastic container. It was completely empty. He set it down on the table, right in front of Chloe. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. Chloe looked at it. It was the exact same container that held the spoiled meatloaf. On the morning they abandoned her, her eyes widened. The smell of rotting food, the freezing cold kitchen, and the crushing weight of the word leftovers came rushing back. "Why did you keep this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "So I would never forget how incredibly cruel I was," Daniel answered. "I stared at it every single day for months, not just to punish myself, but to remind myself that an apology without changed behavior is completely worthless." "Sweetheart, I can't take back what I said, but I need you to hear this from me tonight. You are not scraps. We were the ones who gave you leftover love, and that was our failure, not yours." Tears spilled down Chloe's face. She wasn't the only one. Taylor, Avery, and even Carter were quietly wiping their eyes. Then, Martha stood up. She had barely spoken the entire evening. Now, her hands were shaking as she gripped the back of her chair. "I don't know how to apologize," she began. "Which is probably why I went my whole life refusing to do it." She looked directly at Chloe. For the first time, there was absolutely no ego in her eyes. "I hated you because I saw everything in you that I could never be," Martha confessed. "You are hardworking, you are quiet, but you are unbreakable. Even when I treated you like dirt, you had a purpose. I was just a fraud. I desperately wanted to look rich, perfect, and flawless. So I turned you into a maid inside a house that was supposed to be your safe haven. I turned you into a punching bag for my own insecurities." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "I am not going to tell you to forgive me just because I'm your mother. I lost the right to use that excuse. All I want to say is, I'm sorry, Chloe. I'm sorry I didn't love you right. I'm sorry that when you needed a mother, I treated you like an employee. And I'm sorry that we left you behind like you meant absolutely nothing to us." The townhouse was completely silent. Inside Chloe, two massive emotions collided. There was still anger. There was still a deep wound. One dinner could not magically erase 2 decades of abuse. But alongside the pain, something else was blooming. It wasn't pity. It wasn't weakness. It was absolute freedom. Because the words she had waited her entire life to hear had finally been spoken. It didn't rewrite the past, but it unlocked the cage. She didn't have to be a prisoner to her anger anymore. "Mom," Chloe said, her voice slow and steady, "I can't go back to the way things were." Martha nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know. I'm not going to be the fixer for this family anymore. And I don't think I can see you every single day. Not yet. I accept that." Chloe took a deep breath. "But I am listening to you tonight. And maybe, down the line, I can learn to be a family with you again. Not the old way, a new way. With respect, with boundaries, and with no manipulation." Martha collapsed into her chair, weeping into her hands. Daniel bowed his head, trying to suppress his sobs. It wasn't a perfect, cinematic reconciliation, but it was real. And for Chloe, for right now, that was enough. In the weeks that followed, Cousin Charlie finally faced the music. It turned out the Vance family wasn't his only victim. He had defrauded dozens of clients with fake visa documents. With Maya's legal expertise and Daniel's testimony, it was proven that Chloe had absolutely no knowledge of the fraud. Charlie was arrested trying to flee out of state. Chloe didn't celebrate his downfall. She just felt a wave of relief that one more chapter of lies was permanently closed. Meanwhile, the day finally arrived for the grand opening of the new, massive branch of the Terminal Haven Cafe and Training Center. It wasn't just a small project anymore. It featured a commercial training kitchen, a study lounge, a counseling wing, and a community library. Above the main entrance, there was a quote engraved on a brass plaque that Chloe had chosen herself. "You are not an afterthought. You belong here." The opening was packed. Mrs. Nora was there, wearing her absolute best floral dress, sobbing tears of joy while cutting the ceremonial ribbon next to Chloe. Mrs. Bennett was there, beaming with pride at her former student. Jake, Brianna, Jackson, Sarah, Mr. Owen, Lily, Dr. Vivian, and Maya were all cheering. Liam stood off to the side. He didn't steal the spotlight, but the love and profound respect in his eyes were unmistakable. And standing at the very back of the crowd was the Vance family. They didn't push to the front to pretend they were the reason for her success. They didn't demand VIP seats. They didn't pose for photos to look like the perfect family. They just stood quietly and watched. Daniel was holding a small, modest bouquet of flowers. Martha wore a simple dress with zero jewelry. Taylor, Carter, and Avery stood respectfully by their sides, giving Chloe her space. When Chloe stepped up to the microphone to speak, she paused for a few seconds. She looked around the room. At the cafe, the training center, the faces of the people who loved her right when she needed it most. And finally, she looked at the family that had learned the hard way how to apologize. "I used to think," she began, "that a home was simply the place where you were born. I thought that no matter how much it hurt, you had to stay, because that was family. But I've learned that a true home should never, ever make you feel like you are just leftovers." The room was completely silent. "This place," she gestured to the facility, "is for anyone who has ever been abandoned, belittled, or doubted. It's for the kids who are always putting everyone else first. It's for the youth who were told they would amount to nothing. It's for anyone who is exhausted from having to constantly prove their worth." She looked at Mrs. Nora, then at Liam. Then, she looked directly at her parents at the back of the room. "Forgiveness is not easy, and it should never be rushed. But I've learned that forgiveness isn't about returning to the place that broke you. Forgiveness is choosing not to let that pain dictate the rest of your life." Martha's eyes were shining with tears. Daniel was looking down, nodding slowly. Avery was tightly clutching the letter she had written for Chloe, which she now carried everywhere as a reminder. "Today," Chloe continued, her voice ringing clear and strong, "I no longer call myself the girl who was left behind. I call myself the woman who broke free." The crowd erupted into applause. It started soft, then grew into a roaring standing ovation. It wasn't an applause for revenge. It was a celebration of resurrection. After the program, Daniel approached hesitantly and handed her the bouquet. "For you, sweetheart," he said. Chloe took it. "Thank you, Dad." Martha stepped forward, but stopped at a respectful distance. She didn't lunge in for a hug without permission, the way she used to do whenever she wanted to manipulate a conversation. Instead, she asked, "Can I hug you?" Chloe looked at her. For a split second, the entire weight of their past hung between them. But it wasn't a brick wall anymore. It was just a memory, a scar that no longer bled. Chloe nodded. "You can." And for the first time, without an ounce of hesitation or fear, Martha wrapped her arms around her daughter. It was tight, but it wasn't suffocating. She was crying, but she wasn't putting on a show. It felt like the embrace of a mother who had finally killed her own ego, so she could truly hold the child she had broken. It didn't mean they were a perfect family now. There would still be awkward days. There would still be moments when the scars would ache. Boundaries would still need to be enforced, but the toxic cycle was finally dead. Chloe was no longer the maid. She was no longer invisible. And she was definitely not Scraps. Later that night, after the cafe doors closed, Chloe and Liam stood on the observation deck of the aviation terminal. They looked out over the runway. The runway lights glowed against the dark, expansive sky. An international flight was taxiing, preparing for takeoff. Watching the plane, Chloe remembered the morning her family left her. The screeching suitcase wheels, the door locking, the spoiled meatloaf, the 100 missed calls. "Thinking about them?" Liam asked softly. Chloe nodded. "I was thinking about the old me. And what would you tell her right now?" Chloe watched the plane's engines roar to life. Then, she smiled. "I would tell her not to be terrified of being left behind. Because sometimes, when the wrong people walk away from you, that's exactly how life forces you into the arms of the people who will actually stay." Liam reached out and took her hand. It wasn't a tight, possessive grip. It was a warm, steady hold that said, "I am right here, but you are completely free. And I am so proud of you."